January 17, 1943. Above the Solomon Islands, the night sky pressed down like black velvet studded with indifferent stars. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda sat in the operations tent at Rabaul Airbase, studying reconnaissance photographs by the amber glow of a kerosene lamp. The photographs showed nothing. Empty ocean, empty sky. The Americans were out there somewhere, moving supplies under cover of darkness, but the night belonged to Japan. It always had. For 18 months, Japanese pilots had owned the Pacific night, striking when they pleased, vanishing before dawn, operating with the supreme confidence of hunters who know their prey cannot see them. Outside, mechanics worked on a line of Mitsubishi G4M bombers, their twin engines gleaming dully in the moonlight. These aircraft had terrorized Allied positions from New Guinea to Guadalcanal, appearing without warning, delivering their payloads with practiced precision, then disappearing into darkness before anti-aircraft crews could react. The night was Japan's domain, and every pilot knew it. They joked about American attempts at nocturnal defense, searchlights sweeping uselessly across empty sky, anti-aircraft fire bursting at phantom coordinates, fighters scrambling too late and finding nothing. The Americans, it seemed, were blind after sunset. The confidence was not misplaced. Since Pearl Harbor, Japanese naval aviation had demonstrated extraordinary proficiency in night operations. Their pilots trained extensively for low-light combat, developing exceptional visual acuity and spatial awareness. They flew without navigation lights, navigating by stars and instinct. Their eyes adapted to darkness through careful diet and discipline. Many consumed fresh vegetables rich in vitamin A, believing, correctly, that it enhanced night vision. They practiced formations in twilight conditions until they could maintain precise spacing by silhouette alone. Their aircraft carried no radar, no electronic aids beyond basic radio communication. They didn't need them. Human skill, they believed, would always triumph over mechanical crutches. This philosophy extended throughout the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. Technology was acceptable, even desirable, but only as a supplement to human excellence, never as a replacement. The samurai spirit, they insisted, could not be replicated by machines. American reliance on gadgets and instruments was viewed as evidence of weakness. A civilization grown soft, dependent on tools because its men lacked the discipline and martial virtue to function without them. But beneath this confidence lay a miscalculation so profound it would reshape the entire character of the Pacific Air War. The Japanese had encountered American radar installations in the first year of the war. Bulky coastal units easily destroyed in initial strikes, primitive shipboard systems that seemed to accomplish little. They had captured technical documents describing radar principles and capabilities, yet they fundamentally misunderstood what they were seeing. To Japanese commanders, radar appeared to be primarily a defensive warning system, useful for detecting approaching raids, perhaps, but hardly revolutionary. The idea that radar could be miniaturized, mounted in fighter aircraft, and used to actively hunt targets in complete darkness seemed improbable, perhaps impossible. And so when intelligence reports began arriving in late 1942 describing American night fighters equipped with mysterious detection equipment, the reports were largely dismissed. Propaganda, perhaps. American desperation, inventing fictional capabilities to mask their inability to fight effectively after dark. The turning point came gradually, then suddenly. Through November and December 1942, Japanese bomber crews began reporting strange occurrences. American fighters appearing without warning in pitch darkness, executing intercepts with impossible precision. Initially, these encounters were attributed to luck, random contacts in crowded airspace, but the frequency increased. Bomber formations taking off from Rabaul, flying established routes they had used successfully for months, suddenly found themselves under attack 30 miles from their targets, in darkness so complete that navigation required instrument reference. The attackers came from unexpected angles, positioned perfectly for deflection shots, as if they had known exactly where the Japanese formation would be and when. Losses mounted. Aircraft that had routinely returned from night missions began disappearing without distress calls, without witnessing friendly aircraft, simply vanishing into darkness and never returning. The Americans had deployed the Northrop P-61 Black Widow and adapted Douglas P-70 Havocs, twin-engine night fighters equipped with SCR-540 airborne intercept radar. The technology was crude by later standards, presenting targets as blips on a small cathode ray tube, requiring skilled interpretation and careful coordination between pilot and radar operator. But in the context of 1943 Pacific operations, it was revolutionary. For the first time in aviation history, fighters could detect, track, and intercept targets in absolute darkness, beyond visual range, with reasonable reliability. The radar sets could detect large aircraft like bombers at ranges exceeding 3 miles, sufficient distance to position for attack, adjust altitude, and close to visual range before the enemy knew they were being hunted. Lieutenant Yasuo Kuniyoshi experienced this new reality firsthand on the night of February 8, 1943. Leading a formation of 9 G-4M bombers toward Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, Kuniyoshi maintained strict radio silence and light discipline as his formation descended to attack altitude. The mission was routine. They had flown variations of it dozens of times. Intelligence indicated no American night fighters in the area. The weather was perfect. Clear sky, quarter moon setting behind them. Excellent visibility for visual navigation but dark enough to conceal their approach. At 23,000 feet, 50 miles from target, Kuniyoshi's aircraft shuddered violently. Cannon shells ripped through the fuselage before anyone saw the attacker. The bomber's starboard engine erupted in flames. Kuniyoshi fought the controls as the aircraft rolled inverted, glimpsing in his peripheral vision the silhouette of a twin-engine American fighter pulling away below them. Impossible. There had been no warning, no visual contact, no opportunity to evade. The attacker had appeared from nowhere, executed a perfect intercept, and disappeared back into darkness. 5 of Kuniyoshi's 9 bombers failed to return that night. The pattern repeated across the Solomon Islands and New Guinea theaters throughout early 1943. Japanese night raids, once conducted with near impunity, became costly operations with uncertain outcomes. American night fighters prowled established approach routes, circling at strategic altitudes, their radar operators methodically scanning assigned sectors. When they detected approaching raids, the fighters would position themselves ahead of the bomber formation, climb or descend to attack altitude, then close for the kill from positions that offered tactical advantage. Japanese crews, accustomed to darkness as camouflage, suddenly found it had become a liability. They could not see their attackers until cannon fire was already striking home. They could not evade what they could not see, and they could not effectively return fire against targets that broke contact and disappeared before defensive gunners could train their weapons. The psychological impact proved as significant as the tactical losses. Japanese pilots, trained to trust their senses and skills, found themselves helpless against an enemy they could not perceive. The night, which had once felt like an ally, a medium they understood and exploited, became hostile territory filled with invisible predators. Mission briefings grew tense as crews calculated their odds. Some pilots began requesting reassignment to daylight operations, preferring the known dangers of American fighters they could see and engage over the terror of being hunted by invisible opponents. The strain manifested in operational performance. Formations lost cohesion as pilots maneuvered nervously, breaking radio silence to report phantom contacts, dropping ordnance early and turning for home before reaching target areas. The disciplined excellence that had characterized Japanese night operations deteriorated into cautious, tentative missions that accomplished little and cost much. American night fighter crews, meanwhile, grew increasingly proficient. The radar systems required extensive training. Operators learned to distinguish between aircraft returns and ground clutter, to calculate intercept angles and closure rates, to guide pilots through the intricate aerial geometry of radar-controlled interceptions. But once mastered, the technology provided overwhelming advantage. A skilled crew could detect multiple targets, prioritize threats, execute efficient intercepts, and still have time to reposition for additional attacks before bomber formations could react or escape. Combat reports from early 1943 document the evolving tactics. American night fighters would position themselves above and ahead of approaching Japanese formations, making shallow diving attacks from astern or slightly below, angles that maximize deflection while minimizing exposure to defensive fire. The fighters would close to within 500 yards before opening fire, ensuring hits, then break away and use their radar to reacquire the formation for follow-up attacks. The technological gap extended beyond radar. American night fighters carried superior armament, 4 20-millimeter cannons and 4 50-caliber machine guns on the P-61, versus the lighter weapons on Japanese fighters. They had better radios, allowing ground controllers to vector them toward threats based on coastal radar tracks. They operated from airfields with proper lighting and approach systems, reducing operational accidents. And critically, they had spare parts, maintenance support, and replacement aircraft. When a P-61 was damaged, it could often be repaired quickly. When it was destroyed, another arrived from the United States within weeks. Japanese units, starved for resources by 1943, could not replace losses at comparable rates. Each bomber lost to night fighters represented not just crew casualties, but irreplaceable material losses that degraded overall capability. By mid-1943, Japanese commanders faced an uncomfortable reality. They had lost control of the night sky. The tactical solution, abandoning night operations, was strategically unacceptable. Daylight raids suffered even higher casualties against swarms of American fighters. The only viable approach was to continue night operation while minimizing exposure, which meant flying longer routes to avoid radar coverage, operating at extreme altitudes or very low levels where radar performance degraded, and accepting significantly reduced operational tempo and effectiveness. None of these adaptations restored the initiative Japan had enjoyed through 1942. The Americans, having solved the problem of night interception, simply expanded their coverage, deployed more night fighter squadrons, and refined their tactics. By late 1943, American night fighters ranged freely over Japanese-held territory, hunting not just bombers but reconnaissance aircraft, transport flights, and even individual stragglers attempting to ferry supplies under darkness. The symbolic importance transcended tactical considerations. Radar represented something deeply troubling to Japanese military philosophy: the subordination of human excellence to mechanical systems, the replacement of trained instinct with electronic guidance. Accepting that radar-equipped aircraft could defeat visually guided pilots meant accepting that technological superiority could overcome martial virtue. This challenged fundamental assumptions about warfare and national character. If machines could see better than trained eyes, fly more precisely than skilled hands, fight more effectively than disciplined warriors, then what value remained in the samurai tradition? What advantage did Japan's emphasis on spiritual strength and individual excellence provide against an opponent who simply built better tools? The question never received satisfactory resolution within Japanese military circles. Some officers argued for accelerated development of indigenous radar technology. Japan possessed the theoretical knowledge and industrial capability, but had allocated resources elsewhere, prioritizing quantity over technological sophistication. Others insisted that improved training and tactics could neutralize American technological advantages, though operational results contradicted this optimism. A few prescient voices recognized that Japan faced an opponent with superior industrial capacity, technological innovation, and scientific integration with military planning, an opponent that would continue widening the gap unless Japan fundamentally reorganized its approach to warfare. These voices went largely unheeded. By 1943, Japan lacked the time, resources, and institutional flexibility to reshape its military-industrial structure. The American advantage extended beyond the technology itself to the entire system supporting it. Radar operators were carefully selected through aptitude testing, trained in dedicated schools, and assigned to squadrons with clear career paths and recognition. Technical representatives from manufacturers deployed to forward bases, providing maintenance support and collecting feedback for design improvements. Tactics evolved continuously as combat experience accumulated and was systematically analyzed and disseminated through training commands. Pilots and operators worked as integrated teams, their coordination refined through hundreds of practice intercepts before entering combat. This systemic approach, identifying requirements, developing solutions, training operators, supporting deployed systems, and continuously improving performance, represented American industrial warfare at its most effective. The Japanese, lacking equivalent systems integration, could not replicate these advantages even when they captured intact radar equipment from downed American aircraft. There exists preserved correspondence between Japanese naval aviators from this period that reveals the psychological transformation. Lieutenant Sadamu Kamachi, writing to his family in April 1943, described the experience. "We fly into darkness knowing the Americans can see us while we remain blind. It is like fighting with closed eyes against an opponent whose eyes are open. Courage cannot overcome what we cannot perceive. Skill cannot defeat what we cannot engage. We are samurai dueling with invisible swords, and we are losing." The letter reflects not cowardice or defeatism, but honest assessment from experienced combat personnel confronting capabilities they had not anticipated and could not counter. Kamachi died 3 weeks after writing that letter, his aircraft shot down during a night supply run to Kolumbangora. American night fighter pilots, for their part, recognized the advantage they possessed, but also acknowledged the courage of Japanese aircrews who continued operating despite heavy losses. Captain James O'Keefe, flying P-61s with the 6th Night Fighter Squadron, recorded in his mission diary, "They keep coming even though they must know we're up here waiting. Takes guts to fly into darkness knowing someone might be tracking you with radar, lining up a shot you'll never see coming. Respect that, even as I put them down." This combination of tactical ruthlessness and respect for enemy courage characterized much American combat reporting from the period. The symbolic object that came to represent American technological dominance in Pacific night operations was neither weapon nor aircraft but the humble cathode ray tube, the glowing green screen where radar operators watched blips representing enemy aircraft. That small circular display, no larger than a dinner plate, housed the essential advantage that shifted control of the night sky from Japan to America. It represented not just one technology but an entire paradigm. The conviction that human capabilities could be amplified through carefully engineered systems, that warfare could be rationalized through scientific method, that victory belonged to nations that most effectively integrated technology, training, and industrial production. The green glow of radar screens became as symbolic of American air power as the rising sun emblem was of Japanese determination. By 1944, Japanese night operations in contested airspace had become suicide missions undertaken only in desperate circumstances. American night fighters, now including radar-equipped versions of the Grumman F-6F Hellcat operating from carriers, established complete nocturnal dominance. Japanese transport aircraft, attempting to resupply bypassed island garrisons, flew only during the most dangerous pre-dawn hours, or during weather so poor that radar effectiveness degraded, conditions that also increased navigation accidents and operational losses. The vaunted Japanese ability to operate effectively at night, which had seemed so dominant in 1942, had been entirely neutralized through American technological development and tactical innovation. The transformation offers broader lessons about technological warfare and institutional adaptability. Japan entered World War II with highly trained personnel, proven tactics, and appropriate equipment for the operational environment of 1941. But warfare evolves, and victory belongs to combatants who evolve faster than their opponents. The Americans, starting from a position of tactical inferiority in Pacific night operations, identified the problem, developed technological solutions, trained personnel to employ the technology effectively, and deployed capabilities that fundamentally altered the operational environment, all within 18 months. This rate of innovation and adaptation proved decisive across multiple domains throughout the Pacific War. The laughter of Japanese pilots contemplating American radar, the confident dismissal of mechanical aids as inferior to human excellence, echoed other miscalculations throughout history where martial tradition confronted technological revolution. But technology alone never determines outcomes. The radar sets installed in American night fighters were tools, nothing more. They required skilled operators working within effective tactical frameworks, supported by robust logistics and maintenance, guided by sound intelligence, and employed by commanders who understood both capabilities and limitations. The Americans created that entire system while simultaneously fighting across thousands of miles of ocean. Japan, constrained by limited resources and institutional rigidity, could not match that systemic integration. The night sky above the Solomon Islands, once owned by Japan through skill and daring, passed to American control through innovation and industrial capacity. The transformation happened gradually, individual intercepts becoming patterns, patterns becoming trends, trends becoming dominance. Japanese pilots who survived the transition carried memories of those terrifying final missions, hunted by enemies they could not see, fighting battles they could not win. Some of those survivors, interviewed decades after the war, spoke of radar with something approaching mystical dread, as if it represented not mere technology but a fundamental shift in the universe's rules, a change that made old certainties obsolete and demonstrated that courage and skill, while noble and necessary, were insufficient against opponents who possessed better tools and knew how to use them. The green glow of radar screens illuminated more than enemy aircraft. It lit pathways to a future where warfare would be increasingly mediated by electronic systems, where human operators would guide rather than directly control weapons, where victory would be determined as much by industrial capacity and technological sophistication as by individual valor. The Japanese pilots who laughed at American radar in 1942 were laughing at the future, and the future destroyed them. Not because they lacked courage or skill, but because they fought for a nation that had not prepared for the kind of war the 20th century demanded. A war where scientific advancement and industrial production mattered more than martial tradition, where nations that could harness technology and train personnel to use it effectively would defeat nations that could not, regardless of which possessed greater warrior spirit. Above the Pacific, on countless forgotten nights, American radar operators watched green blips crawl across their screens, calculated intercept angles, and guided their pilots toward contacts that became silhouettes, then targets, then fireballs falling into dark water. Each successful intercept demonstrated the same truth, that warfare had fundamentally changed, that technology properly employed could overcome any amount of traditional skill, and that the laughter born of confidence in old certainties could be silenced by innovations those certainties had blinded men from anticipating. The night belonged to those who could see through darkness, and America had given its pilots electronic eyes while Japan's warriors flew blind, lost in shadows of their own creation, hunting ghosts while being hunted by machines they had dismissed as impossible.